Hey, it's Curly, and today we're going to be doing a simple clan guide for Vanguard 0. Essentially, if you've ever wondered what a certain clan can do, what they're sort of capable of, what their playstyle is, but you don't really want to invest in, let's say, getting all the cards for it or building a deck or anything like that, I'm going to help you out today and just go over every single clan that's available in Vanguard 0 as of right now, and just give you a sort of general synopsis of how they play. So there are actually several different clans in Vanguard 0 alone. In Vanguard as a whole, there's even more clans, so there's a possibility that I might have to make an update on this in the future because we might actually have more clans to talk about. But for now, we'll talk about all the clans that we have in Vanguard 0, which are basically, I guess, the main set of clans. When you talk about clans, as you may or may not know, for Vanguard, in order to build a deck, you have to pick a specific clan, and you can only use cards from that clan in your deck. Right? You can compare it to sort of like Yu-Gi-Oh, where if, for example, you would only use cards from a specific archetype, not exactly, but it's more accurately like you could only use cards from a specific attribute, right? Or if it was something like Magic, where you would only do a deck of a certain color or something like that. That's kind of how Vanguard works. You can't mix match anything except for one or two cards that break that rule. So we're going to start off with the first clan here in Royal Paladin. So the main sort of game plan for Royal Paladin is generally just to swarm the field with a lot of different units, be it grade 1, grade 2, whatever the case may be. The main strength for Royal Paladins is to just get as many bodies as board as possible. There's just about 3 main archetypes, I would say, right now that are somewhat viable. There is the sort of alt-mile variant right now, which isn't really an archetype as much. It's sort of just the newer Royal Paladin stuff, but a lot of them do work well with alt-mile. He kind of centers around using your G-Zone in combination with your grade 2s. Other than that, there are things, for example, like Jewel Knights, which don't necessarily swarm the field as much, but they sort of make up for their lack of swarming with the fact that they actually get additional effects and power buffs depending on how many of the same, or not the same, but how many units with the same archetype name of Jewel Knight are on the field, right? Well, they can swarm, they're just not as, I guess, spammy as maybe some of the other ones. And then the other one is the sort of Seeker build, which sort of focuses, again, around the same thing, just getting units on board as much and as quickly as possible. The only thing is that the Seeker build is more sort of focused around Legion and using that to sort of activate your skills and whatnot. So you'll see a couple of, actually on this side here, you'll see a couple of builds, test builds that you can try out. They're just kind of things that I just threw together that you can go ahead and try out for this clan if you're interested. So in general, Royal Paladins are a pretty decent clan. They recently now have been able to play really aggressively because they're able to, swarm mid-battle now, which lets them get a lot of multiple attacks and hit some pretty high numbers on top of that. So they're a pretty, somewhat aggressive clan right now, but they're usually pretty balanced, right? They're usually able to be pretty aggressive, but also able to be kind of defensive in the fact that they can always have, some guards that your opponent has to go through. They're also a main character clan, so they sort of have plot armor in that they will pretty much always get support. More or less, it will more than likely be good as well. Then next up, let's go to Oracle Think Tank here. Oracle Think Tank is a bit of a weird one. In general, they sort of focus on deck manipulation. This encompasses both them drawing a lot of cards, but then also in them manipulating the top couple of cards of their deck in order to ensure they draw or check the cards that they want. They're sort of in a weird spot that I don't really know how to classify them as a sort of playstyle. It's leaning a little bit towards more defensive because they are able to draw into stuff like their heal cards and their PGs more than maybe some other decks, but it isn't as great in Vanguard 0 specifically, since you can only guard with those specific cards, whereas in the actual TCG you can guard with pretty much every card in your hand, right? So they kind of just go through their deck as quickly as they can, more or less, and don't really have a concise game plan so much at the moment. Right now, their newest unit is the Susano here. Much like the old model, this is a newer unit for G that focuses on using your G zone. Primarily, it just focuses on drawing a lot of cards and trying to get some advantages for having a lot of cards in hand. It's not the greatest at the moment. After that, we actually have the Battle Sister archetype, which is a little bit more sort of offensive. They focus, similar to Jewel Knights, on getting Battle Sister cards on field, and depending on how many Battle Sister cards you have, you can activate different effects for some of their boss units. They also power some up, but more importantly, you can usually just draw a lot of cards. They just generate a lot of card advantage, just for the sake of having card advantage. And finally, there's the sort of classic Tsukiyomi, which is more or less, I guess, the first archetype for Oracle Think Tank. And they focus on just manipulating sort of the top cards of your stack. Not so much the top cards, but in general, what you would do is, since in Vanguard 0, when you check cards, if it's not a trigger, it goes to the bottom of your deck. There's also a lot of cards that actually let you put triggers and stuff at the bottom of your deck. You eventually get to a point where if you don't shuffle your deck, you can actually cycle back to what was at the bottom of your deck now being the next thing you're going to draw, and you're able to actually ascertain what all of your upcoming cards are. So you can, stack from the bottom of your deck how you want it to. So you can stack like a draw trigger and then like a card that you want to draw under that, and stack it in that sort of order. So once you hit your actual stack, then you can kind of just go buck wild with everything that you've piled up. Right, then next up, let's go over here to Shadow Paladins. So Shadow Paladins are a bit interesting in that they're kind of the antithesis of the Royal Paladins. They're supposed to be this sort of dark, edgier version. I guess I should go over one more thing that I forgot to mention. Sort of these sort of themes that these clans go over. So for our paladins, it's usually just dudes and ladies in armor. So if you're into that sort of medieval armor clad kind of situation with swords and shields and whatnot, that's Royal Paladin. Oracle Think Tank is a little bit more like Shrine Maiden-y, and then with nuns for the Battle Sisters. So that's sort of what their archetype consists of. It is generally more sort of woman focused. And then Shadow Paladins are kind of similar to Royal Paladins, except just they're edgy. So they're the cooler. They're the cooler Royal Paladin, if anything. But they also have some like mages and witches and kind of stuff. So more into these sort of dark arts kind of thing. In general, the main play style consists of sort of, instead of calling out your units and using them to like power up your Vanguard or your other units, instead you can actually call out your units in order to actually retire them. So you actually kill off your own units in order to power off your units. So it's supposed to be exactly opposite of Royal Paladins, right? They're actually a pretty balanced clan, or their decks are actually pretty balanced because they can just about do everything. They can generate a lot of card draw, they can search out a lot of cards, so they can get a lot of defensive pieces in hand or a lot of offensive pieces, so they're pretty consistent. They can also retire, so they have a lot of control, so they can get rid of units on boards who either hamper your opponent or be more aggressive. They also have a restanding Vanguard. They have like the whole package. When it comes to sort of well-rounded decks, Shadow Paladin is probably the best example of that. Right now, I believe it's this guy. Yes, I don't have any copies of the normal version, I just have the SP. Right now, their newer boss unit is the Clarence Sword Dragon from the G era. This sort of collection, I don't want to say archetype because they don't really have like a specific name, but they sort of work with a specific Vanguard. Focuses more on calling out grade 1s and using that to sort of gain advantage, as well as retiring those grade 1s and also retiring your opponent's units, right? They're in a bit weird spot where there's like a couple of other boss units that have been released recently, so I don't know if this is actually the unit that people do play right now. I'm not too familiar with current day Shadow Paladins, because we actually, for the most part, we focus on using Revengers, which is another archetype from Shadow Paladins, which is more or less one of the better archetypes in the entire game, because this is the one that's the most well-rounded and that lets you do all those things that I mentioned before, but just about everything has to be, you know, tied behind this Revenger name. But yeah, this does everything, searches out, calls stuff, your Vanguard can attack multiple times, the whole shebang. Right. Then other than that, we have the sort of original archetype, I guess, for Shadow Paladins in the Phantom Blaster Dragon, which is just sort of, it's kind of basic in that it just retires your rear guards to then maybe retire one of your opponent's rear guards, but also to power up your Vanguard and get like a critical. That's mainly what this build focuses on. Again, we'll have couple of decks on the side. I forgot to mention for Oracle Think Tank, but I'm sure I showed them anyways. In general, they're, like I said, they're pretty solid. They don't super excel at anything, at least that I've seen. They're just a nice solid deck. If you can build Shadow Paladins, it'll definitely let you go very far. It is a little bit difficult to get some of the pieces because some of them are triple rare, so it is a little bit tricky, but you will be rewarded. This is a deck that came out, Revenge at the very least, came out many years ago, or many months ago, not years ago, many months ago, and it's still relevant now, which is really cool. They don't really suffer too much. They don't really have too many bad matchups because they don't really care too much about what your opponent does for the most part, which is nice. Of course, these are all like super generalizations. I'm not going to go beat by beat versus every single clan. So I'm just giving you as top level and as high level as I can for right now. So next up, we have Gold Paladins. Gold Paladins is kind of like an offshoot of Royal Paladins, where it similarly focuses on swarming the field and your Vanguard getting powered up based on the number of units that you have on board. But it sort of does it in a different way than how Royal Paladins can, because Royal Paladins, for the most part, they just call whatever card straight from the deck, whereas for Gold Paladins, you actually just either call randomly the top card from your deck, or you like pick up 3 cards from the top of your deck and call one of those instead, right? So it has a little bit more of like an RNG sort of focus behind it, but they can also swarm a lot more aggressively because of this, because it's sort of in terms to balance out the fact that you can't just call out anything, you can call out things a lot easier, right? It just might not be what you wanted to call in the first place. In general, they sort of follow the same sort of theme of Royal Paladins, if it's just dudes in armor, but you know, they're more golden. And there's also a lot of lions here. Right now, one of the main grade 3s that we have on archetypes is the Gurgrit here. I believe this might get a lot better in the future. As of right now, it doesn't really do too much. It does focus on, you know, calling cards from the top card of your deck and then also powering up your Vanguard that way. But it doesn't really have a solid game plan as of right now. If you want something with a solid game plan, you can go into one of the more first, I would say, archetypes here in the Ezo line, which has gotten a lot of support in Zero lately, because again, it is one of those plot armor clans that, you know, is main part in the anime and main character use it, etc, etc. Ezo is very good. It's very good at swarming the field, getting units on board, and powering himself up. He also has a sort of upgraded form, which lets you get strong. He has a couple of upgraded forms, which lets you just swarm the field and, you know, do even more damage, get critical, stuff like that. In general, also, Gold Paladins, for the most part, specialize on unlocking your units, because they're supposed to be sort of the anti-Link Joker deck, which we'll talk about that in quite a bit. Got a while before we get to Link Joker. So they also specialize in that as well. Then the other sort of archetype for Gold Paladins is Liberators. This is probably the bulk of the cards that we have right now are all Liberators. They focus not so much on swarming specifically, but focusing on Blaster Blade Liberator. So they focus on a specific grade 2 for the most part. So you see a lot of recycling of that card, calling it out, getting effects if you get that card, etc., etc. And they're also very focused on their own archetype. So just about every other card will say you have to have a Liberator Vanguard, and you can only call a Liberator Rearguard, etc., etc. But other than that, they have a lot of the mixed matches that the other sort of Gold Paladin decks have, where you can, call from the top couple cards of your deck and whatnot. But they also have a more sort of offensive approach as well, and a lot more controller approach. There's a lot more balance, to say the least, right? They also have a lot of support. This one is a little bit unfortunate for newer players that are trying it out now, because there are so many triple rares for this deck. You don't have to play all of them, but there is a lot of triple rares that you can consider. And for us older players, they gave out most of these for free, which is why a lot of people can play Liberators, but they don't because they're sick of it. Because back in the day, everyone would play them. So now nobody really plays them, even though everyone pretty much has that deck available because they got all the pieces. They just don't want to play it because they're so sick of it when it was running rampant on the ladder. Because they gave out, for example, this was a rank reward, this was a rank reward at some point. I believe the main piece, Blaster Blade Liberator, was a rank reward. A lot of the pieces you can just kind of get just from playing the game, which is what made this deck really easy to play. Then next up, we've got Angel Feather here. Angel Feather, in terms of aesthetic, is kind of what you would expect. They're angels, and they sort of focus on like this sort of medical healing, hospital sort of aesthetic. It's generally also a more sort of woman-focused clan. In terms of like, I don't mean in terms of like, whenever I say that, when I said that for Oracle Think Tank, I don't mean in terms of like who plays it. I don't have to be like, you have to be a woman in order to no. It's just, I mean, in terms of like the actual card art, right, that it depicts and the actual cards, right? That's what I'm trying to say. The playstyle for Angel Feather is actually really interesting because you have to actually manipulate your, instead of how Oracle Think Tank manipulates the deck, Angel Feather manipulates their damage zone, so they can actually very easily put cards into their damage, take it out from their damage, call it out mid-battle, do a lot of things. So you kind of use your damage zone as like a second hand, which is really cool. Right now, the main boss unit for the G era is Gabriel here. Much like all the other G units, or G boss units, they focus on using your G zone, but in general it sort of focuses on calling out the top 3 cards, or looking at the top 3 cards from your deck, putting one into damage and calling one out. So it's a more sort of aggressive build where you can just sort of swarm the field with a lot of units that you need. Before that, we had the Celestial build here, which is somewhat similar to the Gabriel build, except it's more restricted into what you can actually, put in the damage, take out of the damage, because they usually have to be Celestial named, but they also focus on powering up your units, right? Depending on if you meet certain criteria. Usually it's if you have a certain card in your damage zone. So you get into the situation that it's kind of annoying where you have to like make sure a specific card is in your damage zone and it stays there and you don't heal out of it. Because this deck, in addition, I should say, to being able to manipulate your damage, it can also heal a lot because they can actually play a 5th heal in their deck and they can very easily recycle their heals. And they also have a G zone, a G unit, that's what I'm trying to say, that can actually just heal for free, more or less, right? So in general, this is a more sort of defensive clan because of that, because of the fact that they can recycle their heals and just heal on spot and, get a lot of defensive pieces from their damage and pull it out from the deck into the damage into their hand, stuff like that. It's definitely a more defensive clan. They can be pretty aggressive as well. Now, thanks to the new support that they've gotten recently, this is a pretty strong clan. It is a very sort of difficult clan. I wouldn't recommend this for someone who's just starting out. For one, the fact that it might be a little bit expensive to get into. And 2, the fact that it is kind of complicated to get sort of the hang of everything. If you want to test yourself, go for it, but you might end up having a miserable time until you get the hang of it. Then the last clan we'll take out from this section here is actually Genesis. Genesis is kind of an interesting clan because they have a lot of different aspects to them in terms of their playstyle. but their general playstyle focuses on soul charging, so taking cards from your deck, putting them onto your Vanguard, and using that as a resource, and then going into your soul, and whenever you soul blast a card for an effect, you then get an additional effect on top of that, right? That's sort of what Genesis focuses on. Genesis is more sort of, in terms of aesthetic, it's more sort of like this goddessy, witchy, magical sort of aesthetic. I can't really describe it too well, but you know, we have like this sort of, maybe this is a better example, this witch lady here, and then there is sort of like these more like shrine maiden-y kind of cards. I guess shrine maiden, maybe not goddessy, shrine maiden is probably a better example, right? In terms of bosses, there is Fafnir here, which is a new unit that we just received. In the G era, there's actually an event clan, which means it is something you can technically play for free if the event comes up, and you can grind out the cards, which is nice. Fafnir focuses on sort of massive soul charging to the point where you almost deck out constantly, and then, you know, using your soul to gain advantage, right? Especially soul blasting those units out for a cost, and then bringing those units back as well. Then, other than that, there are two other main archetypes here. There are witches, which in general Genesis all does the same thing. You soul charge, soul blast for a cost, get an advantage from soul blasting with those cards. Witches do that as well. The only thing with witches is that they have to be specifically witch named card, so it's sort of a locked archetype in that way. And then there's the Regalia cards, which are a little bit more sort of flexible in their playstyle, because they have some cards that can do guard restricts, they have cards that can do restanding, that the Vanguard can restand, so they're not as simple as of yet to just classify into one thing, because they have a couple of different boss units. But in general, Genesis is another more difficult clan. It is not very, but it is definitely more RNG based, right? Because you can definitely go many games where you just soul charge a lot of your, let's say, triggers or your heals or your PGs or something like that, and be put in a really tough spot and not be able to get what you need. They also don't really have like a good, they don't have a lot of good grade 2s yet, aside from just one card. So that is a little bit tough. So they do have a lot of tough matchups, especially they have the worst matchup against anything that doesn't let them use their drop zone. Because they need to very, very badly be able to put a lot of cards back into their deck. And if they don't have access to that, they're in a really bad spot. But in general, they can use their soul really well in order to pull out cards and then use them for either attacking or what have you. But yeah, as I've mentioned in a couple of other videos, if you're new to Vanguard, try out Royal Paladins. If you can, Shadow Paladin, Kagro, and Gear Chronicle. I think those are some really good clans for you to get started with. They are somewhat balanced in what they can do. They can kind of do a little bit of everything. Some of them are a lot more control focused. They can definitely get you started. They also have a lot of support, and they will be supported a lot in the future. Sorry for banging my mic. And I think that'll do it for this video. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of my super vast generalizations. Let me know if this helped you. I hope it did. I just wanted to make sure you have a good understanding of what deck you may want to try out, because it's kind of difficult to do that right now, and you kind of just have to invest a bunch of resources, and you might not even like any of those clans, so now you have a sort of general idea, and I hope the example deck helps a lot as well. But in any case, till next time, take care of yourself.